Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining this month's edition of Tales from the CTO. I'm your host, I guess. My name is Jamie McMahon. I'm the CTO here at ProServe IT. And today we're going to be talking about your core business applications. And this inside of your business is probably that main application or main system that kind of runs your world, right? Whether it runs your production floor, whether it's how you invoice your customers and kind of tracks time, or whatever your world is, it's kind of that main system. And I've been getting questions around, how do I know when it's time to get a new system? What are the things that I should be looking for in order to help me make a decision over whether I should be, looking at options or figuring out how to do that? And we find that the best way to do everything is usually with a system, a process, so to speak. And at a very high level, again, every business will be different. And so when we double click into each individual organization, there's different characteristics and things that we would look at. But at a macro level, really we want to evaluate this from both a value and a risk perspective, i.e., how is the application that you're leveraging delivering value to the business, and is it delivering value to the business commensurate to where you need to be? And from a risk perspective, is it no longer safeguarding the interests of your business, and is it actually a risk either from people not following the process and doing things outside the application, or it's just built on legacy technology that makes things difficult? So in order to help us evaluate things, we're going to build this quadrant. And just like many quadrants, kind of upright is good, bottom left is bad. And effectively, we want to move away from being in a high risk, low value scenario up towards a low risk, high value scenario. And we can probably categorize our application to sit in one of these four quadrants, and that will kind of guide us into what action we should be taking. So to start off, if we have an application that sits, in our opinion, around low value, high risk, obviously this is something we need to go and almost immediately action. And so how do you know that you've got an application that has low value and high risk? So a couple things to look out for. So on the risk side of the equation, so to speak, it's, maybe the application, has a separate account that you need to log into. And therefore, usually it's if that's a good indicator that the application isn't built on modern security practices and might be introducing risk. The other security side of things that's common is people tend to avoid your existing application because either it's too difficult or it doesn't actually do what you want it to do or what the people need it to do. And therefore, when they're avoiding this system, they're usually introducing and saving data, saving content in a place you do not want it to be done. And that's usually in a place that you can't control. So you've got no ability to retain that information. You've got potentially sensitive IP that sits in a spot where it's kind of outside of your purview. And we want to make sure that we can mitigate against that. So that's kind of the high risk. On the low value side, this is something that usually is symptomatic, or you can identify this if there are a lot of tasks, even though you have this core business system, a lot of tasks that still need to be done manually. Or there are actual processes, key processes in your business. So you kind of have a workflow. You work in and out of the system. So you do this task A in the system, then you do task B outside the system, and back and forth. And so that to me is something that's not institutionalizing your business processes in a way to help support your business. And finally, do you actually have repetition between systems? So do you do tasks in one system, and as you work through, you actually have to replicate that same task again in some other system, or manually in some paper format or some offline format? And these are all not all bulletproof, so to speak, in terms of identifying that you need to do something. But these are some of the clues to look out for to say, you know what, we may have an application that isn't supporting the business, and more importantly, if this is early days, fast forward 2 years, and where will we be then? Because that's really what we want to think about here. The time span, the horizon for this business application needs to be greater than 12 months. It needs to be at least 24 months and probably 36 to 48 months from a time span perspective. So if it's difficult now, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And that's where you need to think about that low value, high risk. Moving forward, if you get into kind of the corners, so to speak, right? So you've either got an application that isn't providing the value to the business, but is low risk. So it's following proper security protocols. People aren't abandoning the application. People aren't abandoning the application to go do things out of the system. If you've got this scenario, you may not need to replace your application. This is kind of a case-by-case scenario saying, okay, we don't think it's not creating the value that we need, but we're not introducing risk by leveraging the system. And so we need to figure out, okay, is this something that we need to go in action and take care of, so to speak? If we have something that's high value but high risk, again, this is going to depend on a business by business scenario over what exactly that risk is and how risky do we feel it is to the business. But in this scenario, we've got an application that is delivering high value to the business. And so there's probably going to be some resistance to changing it. And so maybe there are some things that we can do to augment the system to just shore up the risk perspective, and we may not need to do anything with the actual application itself. And finally, top right quadrant, this is obviously where we all want to be. We've got a system that's delivering high value, so it's automating a lot of the systems. It's creating intelligence in terms of the data and feedback providing back to my business. All of best practices around security being adopted, and users, perhaps while not loving the system, are following it, are having no challenges adopting it, and it's kind of creating smooth sailing. So this is the kind of the utopia scenario that we all want to get to. But if we sit in any of those different quadrants, then it's probably worth a look and say, are we concerned about the risk, right? i.e. either about the the digital risk of the application, or about users abandoning the application and putting sensitive information in places that we don't want them to, or is it not delivering value that we needed to, like I said, automation. And the one thing that we didn't talk about was insights. Right? Are we actually getting the intelligence that we need from our applications to make better business decisions in a time frame where we can actually respond to changing circumstances? So if all of that makes sense, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to have a conversation. You can reach out at cto@proserveit.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next month.